And welcome to Jung at HARP. This is episode number 81, Dissolve and Congeal, the moment of transformation. I'm going to change that in the footer in a second. I am Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm a composer and performer. I am here with Kathleen Wiley, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst. We both play the harp, and so we call this Jung at HARP. And each week we come up with a question that we ask ourselves and each other, and then bring it to the power of conversation. It's not like we're coming here with the answers. We're coming here with the questions. And we're coming here both with questions for each other and also for you to be part of the conversation as well. So if you're seeing this, feel free to write in the chat and we will see it. And we love it when you do take part in these conversations. So Kathleen, you were the one this week who proposed that we talk about congealing, actually. And then I thought, okay, so that's part of the process of transformation. What happens before? And the first thing that I thought of was a caterpillar. I thought of a caterpillar going through that moment of transformation. What has to happen before it congeals into a butterfly? It has to dissolve from being a caterpillar, which is why it does it in this safe environment of its chrysalis. That was what occurred to me. And then I started thinking about what breaks down, what happens in that moment of transformation. Is it just a moment of like, boom, it just happens? Or is it a process that involves other things? And what does it involve? And I have a feeling you may have some thoughts on that. So I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, what I want to say, the first thing I want to say is we don't really know what or how it happens. And I'm thinking of a friend of mine who works as a nurse practitioner in an OBGYN clinic. And she said to me once when we were talking about the sperm and the egg getting together, she said, we still really don't know what happens. We don't know if the sperm penetrates and cracks the egg open. We don't know if the egg opens up and takes the sperm. We're just really, there's still these mysteries. So ultimately, transformation is a mystery. But what we do know from the literature of the alchemist, this medieval body of knowledge that was an attempt to turn base metals into gold, which Jung and other psychologists and philosophers saw as really a symbolic system of working with what comes up inside of us to transform it, transmute it, so that the impulses and desires we have that would be ugly and hurtful to us and other people can somehow find a different expression, something that's life-giving. So one of the principles of alchemy is the principle of dissolve and coagulate, that things have to be dissolved down until their primary essence settles out. You know, it's kind of like when I made chicken broth this week, and I strain the chicken broth and take everything out except the liquid, but always there's a little sediment in the bottom. In spite of my strainers, there's a little sediment. And it's kind of like when things dissolve, there's something that still settles to the bottom. And one of the ways we might look at that symbolically in terms of our life and our music is what settles out are our primary impulses and desires. The essence of what it is we really want that's been floating around in all of the possibilities, all of the myriad desires that we want, all of the things we've learned, all of the things we feel we don't know, it settles down, and that essence can then come into a new form. It's kind of like the caterpillar that dissolves. The essence is the same, but the structure or the form it takes is what's different.
As you were saying that, I realized why I came up with dissolve. And one of the biggest images in my life is from when I was 7, and I had this new stepfather, and he was a child psychologist. I don't know if that's relevant, but one night he sat me down at the table. He gave me a bowl of sugar, a spoon, a cup of warm water, a glass of warm water, and a pencil and a string. And he said, spoon some of that sugar into this glass of warm water. And I did that and it stirred it up and it disappeared. And he said, okay, put more in. And I started and it disappeared. And he said, keep doing it. And I kept doing it until it was like this maelstrom of, sugar crystals. And then he had me tie the pencil to the string to the pencil, and put the pencil on top so the string could be down in that water. And then we went to bed, and the next morning I came out and the string was covered with sugar crystals. They had congealed or they had crystallized around the string, and it was magical. And of course I fell in love with him, which I think was his intention, which is beautiful. But I was like, why? And he said, sugar will crystallize. And this is what you were saying about in the sediment. Sugar will crystallize, but that's its nature.
Right.
But when there is a string in the sugar water, it will crystallize around that. And so you want to look for those ideas in life that are the string in the sugar water that they can congeal around. And so I'm realizing that, first, if I was the sugar, first I'm a bowl of sugar and like blah, blah, blah. And then, I get in that water and then I spin around and I stop having my way of being. I was a tiny little sugar crystal, but when I get in that water, something about the water, it dissolves me. I mean, it's the magic of water. It dissolves me. I stop being the identity of a tiny little, tiny crystal of refined sugar. And then as I reconnect, I go back to my more natural nature. So it is more natural. I never thought about this until just now. It is more natural for the crystals to connect together and create, a larger crystal, a community of crystals and around this one idea. And so I just love that idea. So I'm going to ask, maybe this is too soon, how do we dissolve? How do we dissolve what do we want to transform? How do we dissolve it so that it can congeal in a more authentic to us way?
Yeah. So when we're talking about it psychologically, these processes are automatic organic processes, and we undergo them all the time in our life. What we have to do is be willing to take this understanding to the things we're experiencing. So for instance, when all of a sudden I am dissolved into my insecurity and my sense of, oh, I can't do anything right, or this isn't working, if I understand, if I can bring my consciousness to bear, that's like the string and the sugar water of my insecurity, then something will begin to attach that I can then clearly see. And I can clearly see, what is this insecurity about? What is this sense of I can't do anything right about? And then I can begin to relate to it to better understand it. And in the process, there's another whole alchemical process called calcination, where things heat up. Um, have you ever gotten so angry with yourself about something that you finally changed something? It's just like the anger heated things up inside, and you were just so disgusted with yourself. It's like, that's it. I'm going to get myself to the gym 3 times a week. And you did. It's like in the process of the heat of that emotion, something got clear. It crystallized. And so in the dissolution stage, alchemically, what has crystallized then begins to actually seep into our cellular consciousness. So there's a new impulse.
Okay, so I love that you're bringing up the word impulse, because this is part of the program that I'm just presenting now, is about the 7 strings of passion, the 7 principles that lead us to creative resonance by, in a sense, going down to the most dissolved state, down to the most essential state, so that we can then recrystallize in a more authentic state and come alive. As you were talking, I was thinking, okay, well, what is dissolving from me, in a day? And I thought, well, meditation is dissolving, because
Mm-hmm.
in meditation, I let go of my identity, who I think I am, and I reach out, however I'm doing it. I'm looking at my body, or I'm reaching out to a higher power, or whatever it does. It doesn't really matter, because I'm dissolving that sense of identity that I walk around with. I'm me, and me, and
Mm-hmm.
me, and me, and me. Don't forget, I'm me. I let that go, and I just never thought about what's happening there.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm letting go of who I think I am, so that a more authentic to me
Mm-hmm.
self can crystallize around whatever's in the midst of that, just mindfulness, or letting go, or empty nothing. Let it crystallize around nothingness. So there's, I don't know, so that it is itself. Anyway, that's made me think of that.
Yeah, well, meditation and spiritual practices that are contemplative are a way that um, we can consciously dissolve so that we can experience and connect with the larger self that we are. Often, though, the dissolution that people start with when they come into Hip Harp Academy, or they come to analysis, or they come into my fundamental embodiment practices, and then the processes circles, is they're feeling as if they're drowning in their despair, or they're drowning in their lostness. It's they are dissolved in a way that they can't find a footing. They don't have a string around which
Right.
the essence of who they are can crystallize in an impulse or a desire. And so, if we understand those moments of drowning in whatever emotion it is, or being on fire with an emotion in a way that we feel like we and others around us may be being consumed, then we begin to have an attitude towards what we're experiencing that then becomes a string around which the essence of who we are in that moment can crystallize so we can see it.
I definitely want to hear more about that. As you were talking, I was thinking also about performance, and how many people, I that the point of performance is to lift people from the burden of consciousness for a moment, and drop
Mm-hmm.
them lightly back and slightly changed. And certainly I know I've been transformed by
Mm-hmm.
performance. And I'm remembering specifically a time when I was very, very deeply depressed for many days in a row, in a way that I could really see, oh my God, I'm really depressed. And I remember I was in Germany, and I was walking down the street, and I saw some street performers, and I stood there and I got lost in what they were doing. I got lost in what they were doing. And when I came out, I was transformed. And there's something about getting lost, allowing ourselves to get lost, because it's very frightening most of the time to allow ourselves to get lost, and to have trust that it's okay.
Yeah, and to have a strong enough self that we can dissolve, get lost, and then come back out slightly changed. I'm thinking about the product, which when I was growing up was called Jello 123. I don't even know if it's still out there, but did you know Jello 123?
We
It
didn't have the numbers when I was a kid. We just had
okay.
Jello 0.0.
Gel,
I don't know.
Well, Jello 123 was this Jello product that you bought the powder that was all kind of the same, and then you put it in water and it dissolved. And then when it congealed, there were three different layers you could see. Yeah, there were three different layers that had three different, slightly different colors. They were all in the same color family and slightly different textures. The next time I'm in the grocery store, I'm going to have to see if Jello 123 is on the shelf. Anyway, and if any of you watching know Jello 123, let us know that in the chat, as well as if you have experiences that resonate with what we're talking about. We'd love it if you would share those in the chat too. But In a way, what happened is there is for you in that moment of being lost in the street performance, you were still grounded enough in your body mind and in who you are as a total self that you could come back out slightly changed. Because there are people who dissolve and get lost, and they truly get lost and they become psychotic. They don't come back to themselves. So the importance of being grounded. When you were in Germany, you probably had a gig, you had people you were traveling with, you had responsibilities, you had something you had to focus on. And that is essential when we are undergoing transformation, is that we have like a tether
Mm.
of the old self to hold on to so that the new self can pull itself back into your current life.
Hmm.
Getting lost and having an experience that doesn't have a tether back into your actual life is one of those mountaintop experiences that we then live frustrated with that we can never get back to. So I just want to speak to the importance of having the tether of where we are now in reality. You came back, and what shifted perhaps was the depression, but you were probably going on stage that night or the next day or traveling to the next
Mhm.
gig or
Mhm.
whatever. So I just, that's an important, from a psychological point of view, that's really important.
Well, I want to go back to that, and I really want to ask about, what it's like when someone doesn't have a tether, but I also want to just go back to recipes. Um, because one of the things that I just taught in this 5-day Vision to Action Challenge is the art of using very simple musical motifs as a meditation practice.
Mhm.
And I'm always like, how can you do two things at once? Can I practice and meditate? How can I? But but I know, but just slow down here. I recently was meditating on a specific idea that someone had given me, and I decided to take this one theme. So there's 5 themes in the 5-day Vision to Action Challenge, 5 themes that become a suite. But I took 15 minutes on a single one of these, and each one of them is very, very simple. I mean, like, it's simple, meaning it is this, like, that's the entire
Mhm.
melodic thing that you'd have to remember. You can switch it, it can change, it doesn't matter, but that's the only thing you have to remember there. And then down here, you just have to remember that there's a black string and a red string, and then you go down, you skip a string, and you get to the next one. And that's the whole thing. That's the only thing to remember. But there's
Mhm.
all kinds of things that can expand. You can let it shift. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you actually do. It only matters that that is the tether, that it can bring you
Mhm.
back. And so for hours, letting myself come to this, using it as the string in the sugar water. But I'm just realizing as I'm doing this that because it's the string in the sugar water, the crystals grow out from it. So
Yes.
growing out from this could be this, which is the same thing but expanded from this.
Mhm.
That's growing out of it. And
Right.
because I'm not trying to be creative and I'm allowing myself to really just use the music to dissolve,
Mhm.
using it to dissolve it and using it to reflect what I'm feeling or help me feel what I'm feeling, that allowed me to and to take enough time. I think a lot of people when they're playing music,
Mhm.
okay, that takes 20 seconds. Now what do you do? And I think that's the power. Take that thing that takes 20 seconds and do it for 15 minutes and see what comes out of it. Let it get to you. And that's that. So I'm thinking that this is the dissolving,
Mm-hmm.
letting it to you, like the sugar crystals, the water got to them. They opened up and something new, they could go, not something new. They were able to go back to their natural, not their refined nature,
Mm-hmm.
but their natural nature.
Yeah, and part of what happened is that then, if we want to use the alchemical language, there was a calcination that it was like the burning away of the dross, that everything that was impure went away and one got back to their natural essence that could then create new crystals that could expand outward and new crystals be formed. But what you're saying about the practices and that thing that could take 20 seconds is so true for us too, psychologically and spiritually, and in the rest of our life. So, like the first practice for the embodiment practices is sitting twice a day, building up to 30 minutes each time, doing a body awareness practice where you're basically focusing your attention from your toes up to the crown of your head, just noticing, observing, and naming what's happening in your body. The most simple things are the tethers that allow us to dissolve in ways that our essence can crystallize and connect to the ego self personality we are in a way that the ego personality self we are is changed. And we come back feeling new because we've expanded, just like you did with that one motif on the heart. The same thing happens for us. And so, starting where we are is essential for our own personal transformation. It's not we go out here and get something, we start where we are. And that's part of what the practices that you teach in Hip Harp Academy and this practice with the 5-day vision challenge to me was about. It was about this is a place where you have a structure and a tether. It's safe to dissolve into your musical creative self and trust that when you come back and finish, something will have crystallized that you might not even know. You may not know.
Right. Yeah, that was what the comments that I got was that. So two
Yeah.
things. First of all, I thought you said the eager self. And
Oh.
and it was so beautiful to think about the eager self,
Mhm.
for a moment. One of the things that's really interesting that you should mention the challenge. So this was a 5-day challenge, and it leads into a class called Strings of Passion, which is part of a greater program called Creative Resonance. So each one leads to there, and that's all part of a year-long program. But at any point, it's easy to get overwhelmed and to feel like I got to
Mhm.
get the whole thing. I got to get the whole thing. I got to get the whole thing. And I struggle with that all the time. And I'm always saying to people, and I know for sure that if somebody took the first 5 minutes of that challenge and just worked with that, it's plenty. But it's so hard for us to do that. So yesterday I went to a class, and I just didn't have that much time, but I went there, and in the first 2 minutes, I got what I needed. That's what I needed,
Mhm.
and I was like, "You got it. Get off." But everything in me was like, "No, it's going to last for another hour. I got to get the whole thing. I got to stay. I got to get everything." Even though I'm saying that all the time, I think that trust,
Yeah.
that it doesn't have to be this big thing. You get that little tiny thing and you put it in and you let it allow. And I think what I'm hearing with you, and I love this because this is something I can use, I let it dissolve.
Yes.
I let it dissolve, and then that dissolves part of me. And just even saying that, I can feel a relief. Relieve me of the burden of myself.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm laughing because it's so true, man. We burden ourselves with ourselves all the time. And it made me go back to your example of seeing the street performers in Germany, and you're just being able to give yourself over to the experiencing of their performance, and in the giving yourself over to the experience that you were having being with them energetically in their performance, it dissolved your attachment to the depression. It had dissolved your identification with being depressed. So often we get subtly attached and invested in negative in quotes, in states of emotion and thinking and beliefs that actually keep us stuck. And it's one thing to see it, relate to it, and learn from it. It's another thing to get invested in it, as this is who I am. And this is where the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell other people are so important, because the stories that we tell ourselves and other people, it reinforce our sense of identity with certain things. So, and the moment you got disidentified with the depressed Deborah musician, with whatever you were struggling with, and you were identified, my fantasy is with these free spirited, unrestrained, relaxed, joyous, in the moment street performers.
It's funny because to be perfectly, forthcoming about this, I was thinking about why was I depressed. I don't know if this was the why, but I had asked someone to marry me, and he had said yes, and I was elated for about 30 seconds, and then he said, however, we would, this is the condition, and it was a condition I really couldn't live with, and so it was expanded and then completely dashed. And that elation, I mean, in that moment of elation, I mean, I saw the stars, and they were, it was the first time I'd seen them, and then the like it's gone.
Crash.
And so I just lived in like not even connecting for days. And then when I was watching these street performers, I can remember the feeling of being lost. It wasn't even, a character. It was that I was watching what they were doing, and I can't even remember what it was. I may have been watching how they were connecting to each other, or watching the movement. It was almost like I had been in silence, and I was watching this in slow motion, and then boom, it suddenly came alive, and the sound came on, and it came back, and I came back to life. And it was this feeling of getting lost. And I had been so lost up to that I wasn't scared of it. And I'm thinking as we speak that I have that choice to get lost at any moment. I used to have this fantasy of a park where I would go in, and I would have a watch, or I would have something in my pocket that would remind me who I am, and what I'm doing, and that red means stop and green means go, and all the things that we remember, that we're supposed to remember about life. And wow, Kathleen, you have become the Picasso painting, but I'll just go on. I used to have this fantasy that I could go into this park and forget everything. And after a certain amount of time in the park, this buzzer would go off, or something in my pocket would go off, and I could reach into my pocket, and I could pull out this thing that says, you are Deborah Henson-Conant. You do this. This is who you are. Red means stop. Green means go. Pay your taxes. You're going to die someday. Whatever the things are that I need to know to be alive in this.
Right.
But that the experience of being able to dissolve into forgetting everything, the blessed relief of that, the fantasy of that. Now I keep coming back to the practical part of this, because dissolve and congeal, the moment of transformation. So so it seems to me that it's up to us, not always, but in general, it's up to us to make the choice to dissolve. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but I mean, like, I can make the choice to meditate. I can make the choice to do this if I'm not transforming. But the congealing is not a choice. It is a surrender. We surrender, in a sense.
Well, what I'm going to say is we can make a choice to do the psychic work of gardening for both dissolving and congealing, meaning we can choose to put ourselves into a practice or a process like meditation that invites the dissolution in meditation. You know, all of the great yogis say the meditation practice is not meditation, it's the tool to get you into the state of being. And so I think that we can choose to use the tools, the practices that are like the work of gardening, psychic gardening, to facilitate that we really do have that moment of dissolution where, from again, a psychological, spiritual point of view, we dissolve and connect with our larger expansive self, and then something is born out of that union that is greater than where we were. All of a sudden we come back and we feel transformed because that next crystal is there. The crystal's expanded and we feel it and we know we're completely different, even though on the surface we may look the same, even though we may go back to the same piece of music, but this time we hear it differently because there's something flowing out of us through our fingers that's more complete, is how I would say it, that's more whole. So we can choose to do the practices with our own self, just like we can choose to do the practices at our harp or whatever our instrument is.
Right. That's really beautiful. I mean, I'm thinking, I mean, first of all, I'm understanding. I, like many people, went into meditation like, well, I know it's good for me and I better get good at it. And blah, 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 blah. I went into it like I go into everything to
Right.
an achievement rather than at the service of dissolving. And it takes me to the fourth principle of the strings of
Mm-hmm.
passion. The first principle is impulse, and then there's structure, which is the string in the sugar water. Then there's character, you know, how we are when we're alive. And
Mm-hmm.
then the fourth is roles, which allows us to engage with other people. And the fifth is practice, and practice says.
Right.
So both the engaging with things to kind of try to mold ourselves into them, or just negotiate our relationship with something, and then there's a practice in which we let it get to us. So there's intentional engagement, and then there's also, okay, how do I put myself in the way of letting myself be engaged with?
Right.
How do
Yes.
I open myself up? How do I dissolve my identity that I'm holding on to so that I can then congeal into or crystallize into this thing that is closer to who I am, more pure, more essential, more essential. And what I'm hearing, like if there were a recipe, I'm hearing I can do it at any moment of my life in how I'm engaging in whatever I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can also have a practice where I'm not engaging and I'm just meditating. I'm just learning how to engage with doing nothing. Uh, You tell
Well,
me.
what I would say is that in meditation, we are actively engaging with becoming receptive. That again, being receptive is a state of consciousness that a lot of people very early in life have unconsciously shut down because they've received things, comments, touch, atmospheric energies that are uncomfortable and hurtful, and they don't know what to do with them. So in meditation, part of what we are doing is we are actively practicing being receptive. It's not at all a passive state. And the other thing I want to say is giving up our identity of who we are is a very different thing than losing connection to the self we are. And so part of what we all do is we expand into our creative potential and we individuate and live the fullness of who we are, following the trajectory of the psyche, our own psyche, is we do have to give up our ego ideals, who we think we are, who we're
Right.
aspiring to be, and really open to the energies, the impulses in us, and the forms, the paths they want to follow, to live who we are.
I
And
see. So it's
yeah,
almost like dissolving the imposed identity
yes,
so that the true identity can actually congeal or crystallize or just seep into us.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so if we all operate on the principle, and I'm thinking for me now is with the heart, in Hip Hop Academy way back a few years ago when someone said, I'm going to invoke the archetype of the harpist, I thought, duh, why didn't I think about that? I'm a Jungian. Why do I not sit down at the harp and pray a prayer or and invoke in the archetypal harpist? I'm laughing about that, but one of the things that
Oh, but
has
can we just
I've
stop for 1 minute and explain
yeah,
what that would mean? That if you say that when we go to our harp, we often have this archetype. We've developed an archetype of I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I need to grow. Whatever. We've got this archetype we've created, and one of the freeing practices is to take on another archetype, like the archetype of the harpist or of the bard, of Diana, the goddess of the hunt, whatever, to take on that other identity so that we can let go for a moment of the one that we have. So anyway, you said you that had never occurred to you, even though archetypes are a huge part of you.
I
Of
know.
your,
Yeah, it just had not occurred to me. So one of the things I've really held on to when I was preparing to co-lead a pilgrimage to Iona, which actually um, got canceled and going literally. I did a teleconference pilgrimage with people. I was studying about Celtic spirituality, and in Celtic spirituality, there was the Dagda who was the good god, and the Dagda played the harp. And the Dagda played three tunes. He played the tunes that invoked tears, the tunes that invoked dancing and laughter, and the tunes that invoked sleep. And there's a story about when the warring was going on and the oppositional tribe had stolen the Dagda's harp and they had it on the wall in their castle, and the Dagda and his people come. The other side thinks surely they're going to win because they have the Dagda's magical harp. Well, as soon as Dagda comes into the room, the harp flies across the room to him. There's that energetic connection, that oneness with the harp. And it makes, I think about that now when I sit down, that because you often talk about how for you the harp and the design of the DHC light was wanting the harp as a prosthetic, that it's a
right.
part of you.
Yeah,
And that idea of
like
extension.
right,
Yeah.
and like if you're a centaur or some kind of chimera. Anyway, yes,
Yeah.
sorry, keep going. Yes,
Yeah,
the
no, that's
extension.
okay. And so that kind of image of that is an aspect of the archetypal harpist. That specific image gives me a way to invoke that feeling when I sit down and the psychoanalyst in me says, you're not a harpist, blah. I mean, all that crap. All that crap. So the dissolution, though, of that crap, what you might say put in the demon pot, the dissolution of that is only going to happen though as those two things can be held simultaneously. And this is often what people don't understand in terms of their own transformation in their lives, is that we can't just disavow and let go of that, because that's also got some crystal essence of who I am in it. And I've got to be able to hold that with this other so that it dissolves it, to where I can see, okay, what's again at the root of that is I don't know, maybe what's at the root of it is keeping myself limited. Maybe what's at the root at it is I really do just want my music for myself. I mean, I don't know. But that we don't just throw it and let it go on down the river because it'll come back, but that we engage with it with this string of focus, with this structure of this identity of the Dagda for me, that can allow something to begin to take a different form. Because the sugar that you put in the water that created the maelstrom looked different once it was on the string as crystals.
Right. And you I just want to bring something out because you've said this many times before. There's a container. There's a container in which that dissolving happens.
Right.
And when you said that it flows down the river,
Right.
it's there for us. Um,
Right.
wow, I'm just getting. I know we're coming to the end of our time,
Yeah.
and I want to really pull out what I've gotten out of this for myself. First of all, that the meditation and other practices and playing, that's the container for the dissolving.
Right.
And the other thing that I really had never thought about before was the idea that we are practicing, and I'd love to go back and hear exactly how you said it, that we are practicing receiving,
Mhm.
because receiving was not, whatever the source of that was. It may or may not be important to go back and know exactly what it was, but we certainly lives within us, and being able to identify that feeling within us, that I really hadn't thought about that, and I want to think about that, because I think that will open me
Mhm.
up to the practice of receiving,
Yes.
and being within that. And I'm just also thinking about the swirling, and how that swirling within the beauty of water, the water that is
Mhm.
water of life, that can dissolve us, that pure thing without which we have no life, that that
Yes.
that is what we give ourselves over to, or we don't give ourselves over. I mean, if I was the thing of sugar, whatever, a crisis happens to us, or we choose that.
Right.
Anyways, those are the two biggest things that I'm getting out of today, and I definitely want to go back
Mhm.
and listen again. How about you, Kathleen? What were your discoveries? I mean, I think this is the beauty of conversation, is we
Yeah.
come in not with an answer, we come in with a question, and the conversation is about discovery through each other, through the conversation, discovery.
Yeah, and part of what's coming up for me is I am recommitting to the practice that I did consistently during the challenge of just 3 times a day sitting with my harp and being receptive to what I want to do. 3 times a day. Maybe it's for a minute, maybe it's 5 minutes, but to recommit to having that practice to be receptive to what wants to happen in that moment I'm with my heart. And I also practice that, aspire to practice that every day in my life as I go throughout the day, to really, as I move in the outer world with my demands, to also have kind of an eye to inside of me, to pay attention to where's the water flowing
Mm,
and what are the currents. I mean, this is another metaphor. What are the currents and what's the sediment that I need to use one of my practices to be with and see what happens.
okay,
Yeah.
so that sense of presence, of awareness, and then
Mm-hmm.
presence. And as you were speaking, I also was realizing, I can't dissolve, I can't congeal. These things happen in the moment of transformation. I can't decide when is the moment of transformation, but what I can do and commit to is the receptiveness, and
Yes.
developing the practice of receptiveness.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's my big takeaway. What were you going to say?
And that's big. I mean, that is so, so big, to cultivate receptivity and to cultivate receptivity to our own larger nature, to our larger self. Because so often we've shut that down without even realizing it because we've received so much from the outside world that that's the ego's focus. So part of what we are also talking about, that I'll just say clearly here at the end, is that the moment of transformation happens when we quit looking out there and we're looking within. And my guess is that moment you were with the street performers, something shifted. And there was
Absolutely.
an inner focus that you felt and you were there.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
I was willing to lose myself,
Yeah.
whatever I thought I was. Well, Kathleen, thank you again for another wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone who comes to these and talks to us afterwards, and all the comments that you send us, and what you say about what these conversations mean to you. And thank you for being part of this. And Kathleen, thank you so much for being part of this with me. And I'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.